The creation of NASA. The international scientific and political environment of the 1940s and 1950s, when the Cold War between the US and the USSR grew more intense, is where NASA had its start. Aeronautics and rocketry developments gained popularity after World War II as countries looked to build stronger military capabilities. An important turning point in space exploration and world geopolitics was the Soviet Union's October 4, 1957, launch of Sputnik 1, the first artificial satellite. Having fallen behind the Soviet Union in space technology, the United States was concerned by Sputnik's achievement. The Sputnik crisis, as it is commonly known, made the United States feel compelled to improve its scientific and technological capacities. Along with the Soviet Union's scientific superiority, there was also concern that space technology would be weaponized and endanger national security. NASA's forerunner, NACA. Established in 1915, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics (NACA) was the predecessor to NASA in the United States. In the early to mid-20th century, NACA was instrumental in developing aircraft technologies and concentrated on aeronautical research. But in contrast to the demands of the emerging space race, NACA's resources and reach were constrained. The leadership of NACA realized by the 1950s that the agency needed to be strengthened in order to handle space-related issues. The infrastructure of NACA, particularly its research facilities and skilled personnel, would eventually serve as the basis for NASA. NASA's inception. The U.S. government acted decisively in response to Sputnik and the increasing urgency of the space race. The National Aeronautics and Space Act, which President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed into law on July 29, 1958, formally established NASA. After absorbing NACA and combining aspects of various military and civilian space programs, the agency went into operation on October 1, 1958. NASA was given a wide authority to carry out scientific research, promote aeronautical research, and explore space. By prioritizing civilian leadership above solely military pursuits, the agency's establishment signaled a change in the U.S. approach to space research. Important elements of NASA's creation. Advances in science. Rocketry and associated sciences advanced rapidly in the post-war era. The development of space technology was greatly aided by early pioneers such as Wernher von Braun, a German physicist who eventually worked for the United States. Many of these technological advancements were passed down to NASA. Cold War rivalry. The space race was not only a scientific undertaking but also a geopolitical conflict. It became a means of claiming ideological supremacy and national glory to demonstrate technological mastery in space. Public and political pressure, media coverage of Sputnik and later Soviet accomplishments fueled the American public's need for a more robust U.S. reaction. Presidents Eisenhower and John F. Kennedy were among the political leaders who made space exploration a top priority for the country. Integration of resources. The Army Ballistic Missile Agency, ABMA, which provided von Braun and his team, and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL, which focused on robotic exploration, were among the U.S. space programs that NASA combined. The pioneering role of the Soviet Union in space exploration. Although NASA was founded in response to Soviet achievements, it is important to remember that the Soviet Union was the first nation to accomplish important space exploration milestones. The Soviet space program achieved many firsts under the direction of scientists like Sergei Korolev, such as Sputnik 1, 1957, the first man-made satellite to orbit the Earth. Laika, 1957, Sputnik 2 launched the first living creature, a dog, into orbit. Vostok 1 carried Yuri Gagarin, the first person in orbit, in 1961. The accomplishments of the Soviet Union served as a standard for NASA, inspiring the United States to catch up and eventually surpass Soviet achievements, especially with the Apollo moon landing. NASA's initial achievements. In order to build its capabilities, NASA concentrated on fundamental programs and missions in its early years. Among the significant turning points are NASA's first human spaceflight program, Project Mercury, 1958 to 1963, sought to prove that people could live and work in space. The first American in space was astronaut Alan Shepard in 1961, and the second was John Glenn, who orbited the planet in 1962. Lunar missions. NASA has its sights set on the moon even in its early years. President Kennedy inspired public support and established a clear goal with his well-known 1961 address announcing that the United States will send a man to the moon by the end of the decade. Robotic exploration. Later human and robotic exploration were made possible by the early robotic missions, such the Pioneer and Mariner programs, which investigated the Moon, Venus, and Mars, the Apollo program, and NASA. The Apollo program, which culminated in the famous Apollo 11 mission that put astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the Moon on July 20, 1969, became NASA's flagship endeavor during the 1960s. In addition to realizing Kennedy's objective, this accomplishment solidified American dominance in space exploration. A comparison of Soviet and American methods. The Soviet space program was more closely aligned with military goals, whereas NASA developed as a civilian-led organization dedicated to peaceful exploration. Though their organizational designs and priorities were different, both countries made significant investments in space research. In contrast to the Soviet Union, which operated with more secrecy, the United States placed a strong emphasis on public participation and international cooperation. Legacy and effects. An important turning point in the history of space travel was the creation of NASA. The organization has spearheaded several scientific breakthroughs, technical advancements, and famous flights over the years, such as the Space Shuttle program, 1981 to 2011, robotic Mars exploration, such as the Mars rover programs. The Hubble Space Telescope has transformed our knowledge of the cosmos. An emblem of international collaboration in space is the International Space Station, ISS. In conclusion, the Soviet Union's early space accomplishments, especially the launch of Sputnik 1, directly led to the creation of NASA. Its creation demonstrated America's resolve to compete in the space race and demonstrate its dominance in science and technology. The Soviet Union set many of the early space exploration milestones, but NASA's establishment allowed the United States to accomplish enormous feats, such as the first landing of a human on the moon. Today, NASA is still at the forefront of space exploration today, pushing the limits of human creativity and understanding.